And welcome to this Global Government Forum webinar called Streamlined Support, Bringing Government Payments into the Digital Era. My name is Richard Johnston and I'm the Executive Editor of Global Government Forum, which is a publication and media house focused on bringing public and civil servants from around the world together to share best practice. And we're delighted to be joined by MasterCard as the knowledge partner for today's webinar. And this is a webinar on a very interesting and very pertinent topic, how to bring government payments into the digital era. From emergency support payments during the coronavirus pandemic through to ongoing help that governments are offering around the cost of living crisis, it's never been clearer how important government support schemes and payments are to their citizens. And these crises also revealed how agile and responsive governments' welfare and payment systems need to be. Economic, health and geopolitical challenges emerge rapidly and often require payments to be made at speed. As a result, many local and national governments have begun to innovate on how they pay and are paid by their citizens. We're going to hear some examples today of how agile systems will be key to the future of payments, disbursements, and service delivery. And we'll look at how modern digital disbursement and collection systems can be developed by government, the advantages in doing so, how they can improve the speed of government's response to the kind of crisis that I've mentioned, and how they can be combined with existing government systems. So that's the issues we're going to discuss today, and we have a great panel with which to do it. But before I introduce them, I would like to invite everybody watching along to get involved in the webinar too. You can put a question or a comment to our panel using the Q&A button that you'll find on the screen, however you're watching this session. And please do let us know your thoughts. We will have time for it throughout the session. How has your organisation responded to crisis like the pandemic in terms of how it makes payments to citizens or receives payments from citizens? And how did it respond in providing services? Were existing systems nimble enough to provide the required policy response? Or how do you think that government services and payments can be made more responsive? As I say, we do have a great panel to discuss this today, so any thoughts that you have for the panel, do share them with us, and I will introduce them now. On the panel today, we are joined by Tyrone Spratt, the Chief Business Technology Officer for Agriculture, Board of Animal Health and Labour in the state of Minnesota. Tyrone leads a team of 35 technologists driving the modernisation of digital application and infrastructure as a member of the Minnesota IT Services Senior Management Team. He is a 20-year state employee with 15 years of executive level IT management and delivery experience, and he holds an MBA from Metropolitan State University. So hello, Tyrone, welcome today. We're also joined by Hakan Kaplan, the Istanbul Super App Project Coordinator. Hakan has over 25 years management experience in telecom, banking and technology companies, and since 2020 has run his own consulting firm and engages in projects in the domains of marketing, strategy, brand management, payment systems, digital transformation and technology. He is heading the digital transformation and super app project of the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, and the Istanbul Super App reached over 1.5 million users in its first year. So really excited to hear more about that. Hello, Hakan. Also joining us today is Alexander Bunch, the Payments Project Owner for Cloud and Digital in the Cloud and Digital Services Division of the Digital Directorate in the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government's payment service aims to be the go-to option for seamlessly making payments in the public sector in Scotland, and Alexander's main focus is ensuring that the payment service delivers value fast. His day job, this means balancing between supplier teams and managing internal stakeholder expectations, which are less aligned with the pace of necessary technological delivery. Alexander started his career in the private sector in France as a consultant for IBM, but was also the chief executive of a food imports company before taking responsibilities as head of finance and HR in a banking and insurance sector market intelligence company. Then, since moving to Scotland in 2014, he has worked exclusively in the public sector. So hello, Alexander. And we're also joined today by Anand Meron, the Vice President and Global Head of Government Solutions at MasterCard. In his role, Anand supports governments in their goal to create efficiencies and improve transparency while advancing social progress. MasterCard solutions support the delivery of more efficient public programs to support financial inclusion, drive the adoption of digital citizen services, accelerate the shift to a cashless economy, and foster an inclusive society. Previously, Anand spent much of his career focused on financial inclusion, and he also teaches a graduate program at NYU on creating business models at the intersection of profit and purpose. So it's a really great panel for this conversation today, and we're going to hear some opening comments from each of them and then get into that discussion. But before we get opening comments from our panelists, I'm going to ask Jennifer Duncan, the Vice President of Government Innovation at MasterCard, to provide some initial thoughts. Jennifer.
Thanks, Richard. What a fantastic introduction. MasterCard is really proud to be supporting this discussion, which is both important and timely right now. For some context, our government team works with the public sector in over 160 countries, I should say. I think right now we're very aware of the inflationary and recessionary challenges that you're all facing, making optimizing digital payments and the benefits they bring to the public sector increasingly important. During the peak of COVID-19, we worked with governments across the globe who were all racing to protect the well-being and livelihoods of citizens and businesses. They did this by transforming the way they transacted, often moving from physical to digital. They were delivering vital welfare payments to alleviate hardship. They were delivering credit lines to keep small businesses going and economic stimulus to mitigate the impact and accelerate recovery. Pensioners and the vulnerable were able to stay at home, school children were fed and educated, and businesses continued to trade. However, after these much needed interventions, this has left the public purse already weakened. And as we enter another period of economic turbulence, we need to consider how to get vital payments out once again, how digital payments can be utilised to help fund the public sector too. That is, to drive efficiencies, to reduce fraud, and to increase accountability, but also critically, to enable timely payments to the state in the form of taxation, fees, and fines to help balance the books. My final point is the opportunity digital payments present, and that is in the footprint that they leave behind. More transactions pass through our network each day than there are searches on Google. Not only do these transactions enable the digital economy, they generate anonymized and aggregated data, which form actionable insights. Many governments working with us have been using these insights to understand what's happening on the ground, which enables them to target, to tailor, and to plan. I've barely scratched the surface of this topic, but I hope I've whet your appetite for the excellent discussion that lies ahead.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. That's a really good scene setter for our conversation. And I will now ask Tyrone to provide some opening thoughts. Tyrone.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here. As introduction, Tyrone Spratt, I work for the Minnesota IT Services in the great state of Minnesota in the United States. And one of my most recent experiences here, and that's what I'll be providing everyone here, is kind of in the sense of recent experience with payments and getting money out to Minnesotans very quickly, and providing what I think are maybe some requirements as we think about how we might do things as we go into the future. By way of background, the program that I'm speaking to is Minnesota's Frontline Worker Payment Program. And where that program happened, to give you a little bit of a sense of timeline, is back in April 29th, it was a Friday night, Governor Walz signed a bill that created this law It basically instructed the Department of Labor and Industry, as well as our Department of Revenue, our taxation, state taxation group, and our Department of Economic Development, which supports kind of workers as they get back on their feet, to distribute $500 million as quickly as possible to a group of frontline workers as a thank you, as a recognition of those frontline workers who really here in the state of Minnesota put their lives on the line to ensure that the state continued to function. Hospitals were open, grocery stores open, all of those different kind of day-to-day things that we need as people to survive. And so our program, again, passed, the law passed on April 29th. We had approximately, we took about 35 days or so to open up this application process. We went live with the actual program on June 8th of this past year. Over the course of that time, we ended up with about over a 45-day period, 1.2 million Minnesotans that applied for the program. And that resulted in a little over 1 million eligible Minnesotans who here just recently completed getting their payments. As we were putting together and understanding kind of the challenge we had in front of us, there's multiple kind of factors or things for us to consider. One was just the vast amount of money that we're talking about, $500,000 or $500 million. We had the backdrop of a governor election that was coming. We were operating in the backdrop of also of some pretty high level fraud activities that had happened and hit state government recently as we were rolling out that program. We also knew, though, that in order for us to effectively stand up a program and move as fast as we needed to do, required us really to think about how we might contract and select vendors who would support and work with us, whether that's the banking side of that equation, whether that's the organization we work with that helped us set up the eligibility program, helped us with the distribution of the payment. We knew we'd also have what we refer to as application or applicant support. How do we support folks as they kind of navigate the eligibility aspect, answer their questions, be timely in providing them the details that they needed to. We had the payment and the payment distribution and how might we do that. And in the state of Minnesota in this program, we had both a what we refer to as ACH, which is kind of a direct deposit. And then also we had a second option, which provided the opportunity for debit cards. And really kind of going from not much, if you will, as far as recent experience and how to construct such a program. Once that law passed and we were doing pre-work, we really then had to come together across 3 different state agencies and how are we going to, as quickly as possible, stand up an application to facilitate eligibility. As quickly as possible, then be able to determine that eligibility, support those applicants through the process, make the payments. And then we had also, which we ended up not needing, but then there was also going to be a potential for reporting those dollars that were distributed to the federal government for tax purposes. And we had that as another phase of our program. So as I think about and share with you through that experience, some of what I might refer to as requirements, I think it is incumbent upon the industry to really work with governments, beginning really at the very beginning, which is how might we contract? How do we come together on agreements that facilitate the ability to move fast, distribute money quickly, to do that in as painless as process as possible, but recognizing as well that with the potential for fraud, we had to put some parameters in, some ways in which we could kind of determine that and make sure that we minimize that fraud, and then to really get those payments out to Minnesotans who we really wanted to take the time to thank them in that regard. What we learned throughout the contracting process is the deep need to really come together with all the various parties and really work to the nth detail of how this program is going to work. Schedules, timelines, what's included, what risk does the state accept? What risk might those providers be accepting? And making sure that we can come to an agreement that everyone can hopefully win, right? You know, we want to, the ideal contract, everybody's in a position to win, but sorting through that, that was probably 2 weeks of intensive work with those vendor partners of really getting a solid agreement that I think has served us all well and to protect each entity's interests, but also to deliver the program as quickly as possible. It also highlighted the need to really continue that collaboration throughout the program. As the state of Minnesota works with these vendor partners to distribute the money, those vendor partners in essence become an extension of Minnesota state government to the citizens who were looking forward and looking to get those payments. They really did not care. They maybe understood the difference is that, you know, we're passing the ball back and forth to make that happen, but they don't care. It was, I applied, where's the money? All those handoffs, nobody cared about that. So how would we as the state with those partners really make sure that even as deep as the banking industry or the bank that we work with to really define even how they support applicants. So when folks would call into those banks, we had to have some insight as the state of Minnesota, because again, that bank was essentially just an extension of the state of Minnesota. And we had to make sure that they understood our expectations, we understood their maybe limitations, and then we worked around those gaps as much as we possibly can. And I think that will continue to be a key component of any future type of payment programs. And then my last point, Richard, that I'd like to make for the group is that around kind of the fraud prevention. Again, as we think about those vendor partners being an extension of the state, again, from a fraud prevention standpoint, it took everyone to really bring their best to the table and identifying ways in which we could identify fraud. You know, what are some of the tricks of the trade? We learned a lot from our banking partners. We learned a lot from our vendor partner who put together our application and other processes, as well as the wealth of experience that we had from a state perspective, and really had to work together and kind of share how do we kind of put that multi-level net, if you will, to kind of prevent fraud, as a $500 million program has a big target on its back as we move forward. And so I couldn't, I would encourage everyone to really think about at the beginning, how do you contract and make sure that you're really extending that, that we're all one team, if you will, supporting the applicants. How do you make sure that you have great customer support, application support? How are you thinking about those fraud prevention tactics and activities? And it kind of gets into, related to that is the cybersecurity aspects of that, which maybe fraud kind of falls as one of the pillars underneath that. So I encourage everyone, it is around that planning in the beginning and really going into these efforts really with an idea around collaboration, shared responsibility, because the citizens, at least in Minnesota, would saw no distinction between the different partners. We all had a vested interest to do this program well. Back to you, Richard.
Great, thanks, Tyrone. That's a really interesting insight of how this project was delivered. One, in terms of the kind of vitality of it, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that it was responding to you know, the pandemic and payments to people who had worked really hard during COVID, and that being a really important thing to deliver. And the point about collaboration and teamwork, I think that's a really important issue when you're talking about payments like this. And I think perhaps even more broadly in public services, you know, the citizen doesn't notice the joins often, and the contractors end up they are the face of the state when people are interacting with them, and that's something that engage with that reality at the start and build it into the system is a really, I think, important insight. So thank you very much for that, Tyrone. I'm sure we'll revisit that in the question and answer session as well. And just another reminder, please do make contributions using the Q&A button, as I know some people have done that already, so thank you very much. And we are now going to have some opening thoughts from Hakan.
Hi everyone, I would like to thank you for the opportunity first. So it's great to be here with you. So I'm based in Istanbul, and I am the person in charge of managing the super application of the Super City Istanbul. So I actually, we're quite lucky because we live in a magnificent city, but it's a crowded city. It's a city of 16 million people. So, and we have a mayor called Ekrem İmamoğlu who's committed to transform the city digitally. So that's why he has launched the first super app program of a mega city like Istanbul. And he has started the project about 2 years ago. And last year, end of last year, beginning of this year, we have launched the super app of Istanbul here. And now we have reached to about 1.5 million users in this super app. How we did that and what did it, how did it function and how we have started the project. Actually, what we did is we wanted to launch a program where people could enter with two-factor authentication as secure as a bank with a secure ID. And we wanted to make lives of the citizens of Istanbul easy. So that means once they are logged in, they should be able to pay your bills very easily with one click. They should get onto a bus, so they use the transportation with QR codes, offline and online QR codes. They should be able to pay their bills, and they should be able to pay their parking spots and for electricity, and they should be able to shop in the shopping malls in the super application. So I'm also going to share with you how the project looks like, so that you can have an idea on the visual. So that's the Turkish version, but that's also in multi-language. And the platform was offered to us by a German company called Kobil. Kobil is based in Germany, in Switzerland, in Europe, and they came with this framework to us. And it was a secure framework, which gave us also the option to have the chat function and the payment function, the wallet itself, along with the QR code. So what happened is we have embedded all the functions of the municipality, all the subsidiaries of the municipality into this super app. And thanks to this super app framework, the mayor of Istanbul could easily send his notifications, his push notifications, his messages to the citizens of Istanbul, make some surveys. When the citizens of Istanbul want to have a parking place to be open in a location or a green park, they could send their messages to us. And for surveying and for asking the opinions of the public of Istanbul, it was a very convenient way to operate. And on top of that, there was the digital wallet embedded into this program. So using that wallet, people could store their credit cards here, and people could pay with the cards they have stored in the mobile wallet. And there was also a digital wallet and a digital city card embedded into this program. It is Istanbul card, it's the city card, a prepaid card. So all the payments, whether it's a bus payment or a metro payment, or whether it's a shopping payment, that all could be done from that app, from that super app instantly. So all the municipality functions are embedded. For example, you could see when your next bus is approaching to the station. So how long do you have to wait for the next bus to arrive? Or where is the next pharmacy? I mean, where is the pharmacy when it's, for example, nighttime, where you can reach out to the nearest pharmacy? Or when there is a Wi-Fi network in the city, there are about 10,000 Wi-Fi transmitters in the city. So how you can reach out to free Wi-Fi? Or the traffic, how is the situation of traffic in the city? Or how you can look for a job, and in your city, what are the vacant positions? How many job applications are there, and how many free job opportunities are there in the city? And you could post, your resume here, or you could, if you are an institution, you can post your vacancy, vacant positions here so that you can recruit the right people living in that city. I mean, there are a lot of functionalities in that application, and all of them are in the application. All of them are connected with the API structures into the super app. So we have launched it, as I said, something like 10 months ago, 10, 11 months ago, and more than 1.5 million, I mean 1.5 million people are using it now. Every day there are about 100,000 people, more than 100,000 people logging in and using either a bus or a Wi-Fi network, or making a payment, a bill payment, or looking for a parking lot, and so on. So it's a very active application. As I said, it made lives of the city, citizens of the city easier, and also it brought also a sense of sharing the community of Istanbul. So that means, for example, when people are in financial difficulty, especially in the times of the pandemic, it was very important. Some people, even now, it's maybe more important because there is with the gas and with the heating and so on, there are a lot of problems, especially in Europe, including Turkey. So, for example, some people had difficulty to pay their gas bills, for example, and now they could ask for support from the other citizens of Istanbul. And now you can, for example, using this application, you can choose one bill of a person you don't know who he is, and you can pay someone else's bill. So you don't know whose bill you're paying, and that person doesn't know who paid his bill, but still it is, paid with a credit card, and people helping each other. And this platform became also the tool for people to share with each other their feelings and their generosity. So it's been a tool for such a good manner as well. So for donations, for social support, it became a tool, as I said, and it helped also the transportation easier, because the QR code payment is there. So it's a digital transformation tool launched less than a year ago, and using the COBIL platform, we have launched it, and we're continuing to grow it further. Soon there will be third parties joining, so we will be also including third-party companies, private companies. So it's going to be a marketplace. So people will be able to sell their products. For example, the manufacturers of Istanbul will be selling their products to the citizens of Istanbul. So it's not going to be like eBay or like, I don't know, so gross, like Amazon or so. There will be very minor margins. But the point here is that we bring the consumers and the manufacturers of Istanbul under the same umbrella, with the sponsorship of the municipality of Istanbul together. One last thing is that we will also enable the startup companies to be present here to offer their products and their services to the citizens of Istanbul. So we support, without any charge, we support also the startup companies of Istanbul, so that they offer their proposition to this audience here. So that's in a nutshell what the platform is built for, and we're growing day by day. So that's in a nutshell what I would like to share with you about the Istanbul Senin. Istanbul is yours is the translation to English. Istanbul City Super App.
Great, thank you, Hakan. What a fascinating insight into the capabilities and possibilities of that app.
Yes.
And thank you very much for the video as well. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Thank you, Richard.
Definitely something I'm sure we'll get some questions on, and people will want to explore. Again, another reminder, please do keep your questions coming in. We've got some questions already, so I'm looking forward to that portion of the session. But I'm going to ask Alexander to make his opening remarks.
Hi, Richard, and everybody, and thank you for having me in this discussion. So I'm Alex Bunch, and I'm the product owner for the Scottish Government Payment Service. So I've been working on this project since it started in September 2018. At the time, we were a team of 4. And now, supplier included, there's about 25 or 30 people involved in the development of the platform. So initially what we did was to explore whether it made sense to centralize and standardize the way we make and receive payments. So in Scotland, there are approximately 150 public bodies. And on the face of it, we can't see any reasons why a platform like this couldn't be useful to all of these organizations. So what we're aiming to do is to deliver a common capability, because if we deliver things in that way, it can potentially save the government millions of pounds. So, and on top of this, one of the things we want to become is the go-to service for public sector transactions in Scotland. And we're doing this by introducing flexibility and a user-friendly service, something which has become particularly more important when more people are working from home, and the digital capabilities tend to solve problems. Across the sector, most of the organizations we work with have got their own sectoral systems to manage interactions with citizens and businesses. Usually these systems are difficult to replicate and can't necessarily be shared, but when it comes to the action of making and receiving a payment, the customer journeys are essentially identical, so we know there's a remit for common components. So what we built is a pure transactional service that's designed to be agnostic of the organizations who use it, but also agnostic of the networks or the payment methods that are being used to pay or be paid. It means we take away the complexity of interacting with banks, and we take this away from public bodies so that they can then focus on delivering their core business. We currently only operate for our customers through BACS. So for people not in the UK, that's the traditional network for paying via a bank transfer. But we've tested multiple types of payments using APIs with market providers. So for instance, we've demonstrated that the same platform can receive card payments, make overseas payments, as well as pay into alternative methods such as vouchers or prepaid cards. In terms of where we are on the service journey, we're currently submitting regular payments on behalf of our first customer. So we started in June, and we're onboarding customer number 2. At the moment, it's a relatively slow process while we build resilience and robustness, but by this time next year, we should be in a position to streamline onboarding for multiple organizations. So we're still on the journey, and there's some way to go before we really find ourselves in a multi-organization responding to every needs zone. But what we've got is a working transactional core, a bit like parts of the components that a bank would have for regularly making bulk payments. In terms of the benefits of this approach, there's a number of areas which encouraged us to take this route. So our primary focus is users and how we can support the business of government by providing a fit-for-purpose service. So there's the top layer, which is what people see and use on a daily basis. That means that our user interfaces and our digital journey, which is really important to us so that there's no barriers for daily use. And we provide this to staff and citizens in a usable and accessible way. And by building a common service, it means we can invest in design to offer this guarantee of usability to all of our users at the same time. But being user-centric is not just about the interfaces, it's also about flexibility and how can we help government deliver new services. From a payment perspective, it means having an efficient self-service strategy, or being able to make changes that will drive efficiencies, or being able to onboard processes rapidly. So that, we think, next year is when we're going to get to that position. In terms of efficiencies, they can also come in various forms. So under the hood, there's automated processes such as information about returns or accounts that have been closed or have been moved. Most organizations today do that manually on the basis of their bank statements, and it's about how we can automate that and render messages to organizations under the form of transactional messages that can be consumed by their systems. But also there's other things like providing reconciliation capabilities with payment networks. That means that we offer guarantees to our customers that a payment that's submitted or a payment that's received has effectively been paid or received into the bank account. And finally, in terms of other benefits, there's other slightly more hidden or less obvious benefits. For instance, we procure market commodities once rather than many times. We share knowledge and key resources. So for instance, not just in payments, but in digital capability, we're able to share across teams if we have the same types of technology stacks. We also have common services for operational and security monitoring, which in terms of cybersecurity is key. And finally, as part of the digitization of government, and this is one of the things that we've been getting to recently, is as part of having common platform components in the cloud and using cloud technologies in general, we're able to harness some technology benefits that go beyond the sphere of payments. So, for instance, part of our platform is common with our digital identity project and how we verify people's identities. So that's about how we're building the resilience for the government across the board. So that's me for now. Thanks very much for listening to me, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Great, thanks, Alex. That's really interesting. Look at the journey, as you called it, on where the Scottish Government is developing its payment system, and the benefits of doing so as well. I think that's a really clear insight into kind of why this would be good and why this works for public servants, and why it is important as well, as I think has been coming out across a number of these presentations. Thank you very much, Alex. I'm going to turn to Anand for some thoughts. Anand.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for tuning in. It's been a really rich and insightful discussion already. I often, when I look at these things, I know that the magic is in the details, right? And we've just heard three practitioners really hone in on their programs and talk and share very candidly and very generously their view on what makes their programs tick, what were some of the challenges. And I think it was really insightful to hear that view. Just to change it up a bit though, I'm going to take Jen's cue, and she kind of mentioned something, Jennifer Duncan, when she presented right up front, about the kind of unique position that MasterCard is in when it comes to talking about government digitization. The fact that we work across 160 plus countries gives us a vantage point that kind of allows us to get involved in details when we need to, but also I think zoom out and look at it more broadly in terms of trends, and what's really impacting more holistically of movement around digitization in the public sector. And so maybe, I'll focus my 5 minutes a little bit on that. And I do have a few points that I'd like to bring to the table. The first thing when I think about, this entire shift when it comes to digital transformation around payments in the public sector, I start to think about motivations. And because I've been involved in, government payment programs for the last 15 years, prior to MasterCard, it was really from a financial inclusion standpoint, and governments were a huge channel for driving financial access to people in emerging markets. And in MasterCard, of course, that remained, but also really focused around the digital transformation side of things. And so, so when I think about those trends, when I zoom out, and I see different motivations, and most of these motivations still hold true today. And I think one of the first, aspects that I noticed about government motivations when it comes to digital transformation was really around fiscal benefits, right? And it's very obvious when you think about how complex administratively and logistically these programs are, the number of people they're reaching, and especially when you think about payments that involves physical movement of cash or paper, it is quite logistically intense. And so when you add a layer of digitization to that entire aspect of managing these programs, you are realizing fiscal benefit. And so, and I won't belabor this point because it's pretty obvious, everyone will probably be aware of those things, but there are great studies that have highlighted what that could look like. The second aspect that really strikes me as a motivation was really administrative accountability, right? And I think Tyrone mentioned it, and there's this aspect, because ultimately, as the government or as the administrator of these programs, that transparency and showcasing how this has been delivered, how efficiently it's been delivered, is all very much part of the program responsibilities. And again, I've seen that really be a pretty explicit kind of motivation for driving digitization. The third aspect of this is really around fraud and security, right? Again, it's been mentioned, but this is, if I were to draw a heat map, right, in terms of what motivations are extremely strong, I would say fiscal benefits and administrative accountability would be a light amber, whereas fraud is probably a pretty dark red, right? It's really the center of the heat map at this point of time, because and it's not that digital solves all fraud. That's probably not the right way to look at it. But there are aspects of digital, when done correctly, that will help almost minimize some of the most obvious and blatant fraud that exists in systems. As we go now into something more forward-looking, and I'm seeing this come up more and more as we go along in terms of motivations, I see the policy feedback loop, but more succinctly put, citizen impact, right? So what is my program actually doing for the lives of the stakeholders who I'm delivering the program for? And that involves some degree of more richer insight into activities and usage, and like what is the overall kind of impact on their lives. And we're seeing that really starting to come to the fore in a lot of our conversations. And the last motivation I kind of want to strike on is the citizen experience, because beyond impact, I think governments are very, and this is a very welcome sign, and from my standpoint, where the experience the citizen has as they go through this entire program, whether it's kind of standing in line and applying for it, do we really need that, cashing a check, any aspect of the program, right, paying a bill, how do we make their life that much more rich, like, or just easy, and what is the citizen experience as these programs are being delivered? And so these 5 motivations tend to be they all tend to be there, but some motivations tend to be stronger levers than others as we go along. And then to finally just close my topic, I just also want to bring it around into, so what am I seeing as, the key aspects when it comes to, some pillars when it comes to rolling out strategically digital transformation programs. The first pillar, of course, it sounds pretty obvious. It's digital first. Yes, I think, almost every government program that involves payments today starts with a digital first approach quite often. But I'd say there's a caveat here, which says, I'd say it's digital first with physical touch points. And the reason I say that is because there is still a digital gap, especially a lot of work that we do as MasterCard is also in the emerging markets. And purely end-to-end digital solution could also be a reason for exclusion rather than making a program far more efficient because of that digital gap. And so there's a combination of a digital backbone with often required physical points, enabling citizen interaction, enabling payment services, things like that, which is often the reality of today's program. So I see that as a pretty big kind of cornerstone of any digital approach. The second piece is the elimination of data silos. I think this is a huge one. Like, you know, and when we think about programs are complex because there are different aspects to a program administration. And often what the legacy has always been that there have been some silos because you would do ID verification on one platform, you would do eligibility verification on another, or, you know, a bill payment aspect on another platform. It's very hard at the end of the day then to take those distinct platforms and start to really reel in the data. And what we're seeing increasingly happen is an ICT backbone that underpins digital transformation with separate applications, right? Applications will continue to be unique sometimes or harmonized, as in the case of COBOL, Istanbul. But there is still underlying ICT infrastructure which will help eliminate some of the data silos. And the last point I have is citizen choice. I think this is going to be a huge driver going forward of how governments think about digital transformation. You know, citizens today are digitally extremely savvy. Like when we go on Amazon, we have choice in terms of how we want to pay, you know, whatever the solution might be. If we're getting our salary, we have a choice on how we want that salary to be received. And similarly with government transactions, I think there's going to be an increasing shift towards enabling citizens to make choices in terms of how they want to get received. And then governments leveraging technology to better manage those choices that citizens reflect at the end of the day. So with that, I'm going to pause, and again, happy to take any questions towards the end. But Richard, I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, and a great summation there at the end of some of the kind of challenges and kind of developing trends that you see in government, and what issues government kind of needs to be cognizant of as they drive out these kind of programs. We do now have time for some questions, and we do have a number of them in already. So I'm going to skip the chair's prerogative to ask questions and get straight into questions from the audience. Now I'll the one from JB first, who got his question in before the presentations even started, which I can only encourage for all these webinars. JB asked, for those in public service, what were some of the privacy and information sharing limitations you faced due to existing legislation and regulation, and how did you overcome this? And did you have to change the law to allow for direct payments? I'll come to you first, Tyrone, because you spoke first. Good to hear from you again. But I think this is an interesting one to ask you from Minnesota's point of view. What was the kind of legislation underpinning the scheme, and kind of how did you deal with the kind of privacy concerns, perhaps broader than the fraud concerns? I think we're going to get to it in as well in these follow-up questions.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, for the question. Yeah, it actually for us started with the actual legislation itself, to where all the program related data was classified as private, which is one of the highest data classifications that we have from a state of Minnesota standpoint. So understanding that kind of high bar to begin with, we then also in the state of Minnesota have a very robust set of data privacy and practices laws that we had to navigate through. And the combination of those two legal and law aspects of it really kind of came to bear, if you will, as we entered into negotiations and discussions from a contractual standpoint. There were many things that our vendor partners would have just had to accept to be part of this program, or we weren't going to play ball with them. So there was a lot of that back and forth and give and take as we made sure from a contractual standpoint that it was very, very clear that in handling this data, how these vendor partners would manage that data, the protocols involved with that, the access to that data. How do we in access to data? What are some of the triggers related to that? And we really have laid out kind of a robust protocol associated with that. The second piece is that in our particular program, working with 3 different state agencies, we really then needed to, within those state agencies, needed to do some data sharing agreements. I would say that was probably a 3-week, 4-week endeavor as well, to make sure that the Department of Labor and Industry and the Department of Revenue, again, could protect their interests, discuss how we could come together within the prospects of the laws that kind of guided what we need to do. And then the third layer was, all right, given all of that, are we able to do this in the way in which, you know, we can, I love somebody who spoke about the user experience associated with it. We really wanted to balance making it as easy and as few barriers as possible, while also making sure we complied with all of our data practices and reduce fraud. And that's conflict, right? To try to make all of that happen at the same time. And so, yeah, we did have to navigate a lot around those laws at 1, with our vendor partners, and then 2, amongst ourselves, of what was allowable under state or federal laws to be able to be shared between those agencies.
Thank you, Tyrone. And Hakan, I wanted to come to you on that point as well. Were there kind of particular privacy or information sharing concerns that the super app came up against? And how, if so, how did you resolve them?
Actually, what happened is, in the past, we had, as the municipality of Istanbul, we've had about maybe 35, maybe 40 applications, one by one. Every citizen had to download the application from the store and enter data. They had to remember what kind of a password is there. And it is a hassle. And the municipality had maybe 200 websites, and some were not even updated, because it's not very easy, because you have a lot of subsidiaries, you have a lot of departments and so on. So when we have consolidated everything under one super application, life become much easier, because the ID is federated between these mini applications. You enter with one ID, with one secure ID, with 2-factor authentication, and that ID is being distributed. Once, for example, you are entering one mini application, first, in your first entry to that mini application, let's say it is the water utility company of the municipality, okay? It is a tap water in your home, that company. In your first entry, it asks for your consent. It asks for your permission. It says, now you have downloaded the city application and you're a member of the Istanbul municipality network. Now I will share your data with the company in charge of that utility payment, in charge of that water utility company. So are you giving me the consent? And then the customer, the citizen, has to approve that. And then the data is shared. So the data remains secure, and your consent, the management of the data structure and everything is managed from one location. And that helps also the municipality to cleanse the data warehouse it possesses, because otherwise, there are some typos, the old addresses, the past, whatever addresses of those people in some, there's inventory, some data warehouses and so on. And this platform helped the municipality of Istanbul to have a clean database and a secure management of the data structure.
Great, thank you very much. Really interesting insight into how it actually helps clean the data and improve the data that the government has available to it. Alex, just wanted to come on to you on that point as well, and perhaps kind of maybe looking a little bit to the future as the kind of payments service kind of rolls out. Do you foresee privacy and information sharing and data sharing concerns as kind of more organizations join in?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to hear from points of view from other countries. I can remember talking to people from Sweden, public servants from Sweden, who had a chip in their arm for everything, and coming from a country where if you get arrested, you might refuse to give your identity papers to the police. and you think it's legitimate to do so, it's quite an interesting point. From our point of view, in the payment service, and that's one of the advantages that we've got as a pure transactional service, is that we are able to effectively refuse any data that we don't have a business reason to use. To make a payment in the sort of ISO 20022 international transactional standards, I only need one personal attribute, which can be a date of birth, a name, a social security number, to be able to make the payment. And I don't actually have to store anything else with my transaction. From the point of view of who owns the data, it's the organization that mandates us to make the payment. So social security, pensions, who might be making a payment out, they're responsible for managing the data, and they will have the identity of their customer. They might reach out to an identity platform to make verifications, but not with us, and we will only consume the payment information. That means that for things like fraud, as a payment service, the only thing that I can do is to match data and confirm that I've not had any cybersecurity hacks, but actual algorithm-based data mining is not a job that I have a remit to do. From a data legislation point of view, and in terms of the question, it was, have you changed any of the laws? This is the last thing that I would ever think of doing from my point of view, because it's possibly the most difficult thing to do, to change data privacy laws. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex. Yes, I think changing legislation is probably quite a high bar for a lot of public servants. There is a couple of questions that I'm going to group on fraud and put them to Tyrone in the first instance. One from Jim Downey, which says, I'd like to hear more about how fraudulent activity was anticipated and managed and the outcomes as a result. And one from Victoria Merrin saying, how do governments balance managing corruption through these e-services while protecting data privacy and security? I mean, Tyrone, you really mentioned there how kind of limiting fraud and kind of installing that security in the program was vital. I mean, one, did going through that process kind of come up with new ideas in how you can tackle fraud? And two, kind of from this point in the program, do you think it worked? Has it gone as you would have hoped?
Yeah, let me start with the end. Yes, I will only say kind of one of my favorite phrases around cybersecurity is that there's no there. And that from a cybersecurity standpoint, we're only good as we were about 5 seconds ago. And I think fraud, and with our program, I would kind of take that same mantra. We're satisfied with where we are. We recognize we probably didn't get it all. Somewhere down the line, someone was more clever than what we were able to kind of put together. But as we went into the program, we really kind of bucketed our fraud prevention protocol program in 3 areas. We looked at the financial aspects of fraud and what that might look like. What were some scenarios, almost kind of gamifying it, almost kind of looking at what are the scenarios, what could happen, how would we trigger, how would we see that, how could we knock it down. We then looked at the application process because there were eligibility aspects of the program. Some of it was self-attestation as well. That we kind of did a trust but verify aspect of that, of what we were told with the application or applicants. And then the third bucket that we looked at was really identity fraud. And so we kind of looked at those different scenarios, and they're not clean, right, between the 3. There's some overlap there, but really tried to look at those 3 different buckets, if you will, and tried to think through what are some of the scenarios and what are some of the things that we should be on the lookout for. And then we were able to take those kind of our preliminary thoughts around that and share that with other state agencies who maybe make grant payments, are in the business of making payments, and kind of, we're able to kind of level set with them and say, here's what we're thinking about. What have you learned? What's your experience? What have your programs taught you? And we learned some things, and we're able to kind of develop that even to be a little bit better. What our state chief information officer, the leader of our Minnesota IT services group, now is really looking at, this was kind of our first kind of take of working across multiple state agencies of what does fraud look like, how do we prevent it? And he's charged me right now with really kind of looking at, out of the learning from our program, how do we establish some best practices from a state perspective, or maybe even so much as, say, some standards that we might want to deploy from a state perspective to say, hey, if you're doing this type of program, here's what you got to do. Here's what your fraud, at least minimum, maybe the minimum bar that you have to establish. So we're excited about what we were able to capture. We know that we denied tens of thousands of applications. I think I can share through our fraud prevention programs, and we're really happy about that. We saw some things. I was like, wow. That the criminal mind. I was like, wow, that's you came up with that one. Who knew, kind of thing. And now we're kind of thinking through, how do we share those best practices? How do we maybe establish some standards so that we got a pattern that can be followed for others that come in our wake.
Thanks very much. That's great insight into your processes there. Really useful. Hope that answers the question that people were wanting some specific insight on. Hakan, I'll just come to you to see if this is an area that you have to be aware of when in terms of the super app, or is it a kind of walled garden that you can keep the fraudsters out of?
No. Actually, what happens is, in the case of fraud, we are lucky because we use COBIL's platform. COBIL is a German company, and they are also ranked in Gartner. So they're one of the largest, the best companies in security measures. So there are about 100 million people in Europe using COBIL's solutions for entering internet, for securing their applications and web and everything. So that's why there are very strict measures. Once the people of Istanbul download the application, they have two-factor authentication while they log in, and their data is being matched against the data existing in the inventory, in the database, data warehouse of the municipality. So there is a security check, there is a two-factor authentication, and there are also some other checkpoints. So that's why until now we didn't face any fraud issue or anything related to misusage of the super application. And I cannot say that we are, we're having some concerns in that issue because we're utilizing the platform of COBIL. But still, once the transaction sizes increase, and once we have some more e-commerce transactions taking place, like cell phones and computers and those stuff being sold, there might be some issues eventually, but that is going to be also covered by our security measures, I suppose.
Great. Thank you, Hakan. I'll come to you in a second, Alex. I just want to kind of put this issue to Anand and perhaps broaden it out a little bit, because we do have a lot of questions around the issues of kind of fraud and kind of broader data security that have came in from people watching along today. How big a concern, kind of when you look forward, do you think those kind of issues are to governments when they're looking at developing digital payments systems? Is kind of tackling fraud and this being seen as a way to help do that the key to making progress?
Yeah, Richard, without a doubt. I think I'd probably break it down into two bits. One, where fraud really has an impact on program objectives. That is definitely front and center. What I mean by that is fraud that's highly visible, beneficiary fraud, payment fraud, like, those elements are, and if you break it down some more, right? So I'd probably put a hotspot on 3 areas where fraud has the maximum impact. One is where databases aren't harmonized, so there's no real way to do deduplication on eligible beneficiaries. And again, what I mean is someone's able to dodge the application process and apply twice or thrice, either through a different zip code or a different area or a different program, whatever they may be doing. There's a way in which they are able to do that. And so there are effective ways to kind of tackle that piece of fraud. Then there's eligibility verification, which is all obviously linked to conditionality of programs, right? So you're supposed to do certain things to receive the grant or receive the program benefit. And there are ways in which people can actually dodge that process. And that's, again, I think technology is changing that space a lot, both in terms of recognition of fraud, as well as, the cost associated with doing that. And like not many years ago, if you were to receive a child welfare benefit program, an NGO would actually come knock on your door and verify how many kids you have and then kind of give you a check or whatever it is. And today with technology, there are ways in which you can completely eliminate that. Obviously, things like biometrics, but those can be expensive, but even your basic smartphone, like facial recognition, even passive biometrics, right? Just the fact that, where did you send your application from? Are you sitting in the Cayman Islands and applying for a benefit in Minnesota, right? And you can start to like really get to the bottom of those things, which technology can really help eliminate. So, and I think when it comes to program impact, governments are really conscious about that. Where I think it's not so visible is on the cybersecurity side of things, and the overall programmatic security. And I think we're starting to see that come in place with the right cybersecurity frameworks. But I think when it comes to like, at least my point of view is that it's more focused on program impact and how to deal with fraud in that scenario.
Great, thank you very much. And we have a question here a couple of questions from JB that I would like to address to the panel before we finish. And the session's absolutely flown by, so thank you to everybody who's contributed questions, and apologies if we're not going to be able to get to all of them. But the questions from JB were around equity and access, which I think are important ones to touch on. He says, what considerations are or were given for those people who face connectivity issues, such in rural areas when you're designing these kind of payment systems? And but extended to that, what considerations are or were given to those disconnected or underserved people who already face issues in access to services, such as homeless people or people involved in the justice system, things like that? I'll go to Alex on this point first, and then I'll go around the rest of the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and thanks for this question. So on the first point, I can't particularly answer from within my project, because connectivity is really a different area of government, and in Scotland, which have large rural areas, it is particularly important. But regarding accessing people that you would call underbanked or unbanked, typically people who either don't have a bank account or don't have a bank account that they can use. So we're talking about, yes, homeless people, but situations with a gender imbalance at home, younger people, and also actually quite a lot people who are in a situation of debt, and that means that they have a bank account but they can't use it, because if you pay them some benefits, effectively it's all eaten up by interest. So one of the interesting things is, in government in Scotland, there is a solution that Social Security does use to address this, which is voucher payments. But the studies that we did, and we did one actually with MasterCard a couple of years ago, show that there's 140,000 people, adults in Scotland, that would normally be in that tranche group, but we find that only a handful of people apply to receive money using this route. So one of the things that from a payments perspective that we've addressed as a pure transactional service is that it's agnostic to us whether we pay a bank account or whether we pay an alternative method. But the real challenge from that point of view is how to encourage take-up. It's either how to provide bank accounts to people who don't have them, which I think ministers are particularly interested in, but also how to make people aware that the government has got these solutions. So for the moment, we think a lot of people are eligible for benefits, but don't apply for them because they don't think that they're going to receive the money. And there's obviously a communication issue from our point of view of making sure we get this message across to people saying, well, you don't have a bank account, but we can still pay you in a way where you'll receive cash. And even if you're homeless, if you have an identity, you don't have to have an address. If we know who you are, we can pay you. And I think that's the main difficulty from that point of view, because technology has answers, but if it's not helped, as it were, by the physical world, and I think that's what Anand was saying earlier, is that there are physical touch points that are really important and that we can't ignore, and technology is not going to solve everything from that point of view.
And Tyrone, I want to come to you on this as well, because I imagine these were issues that you really had to consider in the development of the program.
Yeah, we really did. Thank you, Richard. And part of our strategy was we went to them. So a big component, which I didn't mention in my opening remarks, was an outreach program that the Department of Labor and Industry really engaged with unions, engage with other local governments, to where we had sign-up fairs across the state. In areas where we knew there were maybe concentration of frontline workers in the state of Minnesota, that might be where hospitals and other healthcare providers might be located. But also meat packing plants was one of our big areas that we wanted to make sure that we had. And so we were able to engage with kind of partners, allies, if you will, and went out and really did application fairs where we brought technology and helped supported people. We used our library systems. We used other state offices, county offices as well, to where we did have connectivity to be able to help folks do apply online. But then we also, and it's one of our challenges that we always have from a state of Minnesota, is that we always have to allow kind of that walk-up option as well. And so while we didn't publicize it, we could accept paper applications. We did have individuals that came down to our location in Minnesota, in St. Paul, the capital of Minnesota, to where folks could come down into our physical office, and we had staff on site to kind of walk them through the application process. So the feedback that we've gotten, and based again on what we see to be very successful, of having a little over 1.2 million applications or applicants, we feel that our outreach program did very well. We were able to overcome a lot of that connectivity issues. And we made sure, I think for the technologists here, we made sure that we had a good mobile experience as well. So you didn't have to have a PC or those things, that you could actually apply from your mobile device. And in Minnesota, that's just about everybody has access to a smartphone. And so they were able to engage with the program that way as well. So again, by all accounts, that was fairly successful. We got some who, I didn't apply. That continues to be a challenge. But one aspect of our program, there was 45 days for you to apply. So we kind of like as much outreach, and as this was a huge story in the press in Minnesota. It's kind of like, how could you not have heard about the program? We still haven't unpacked that one, because I'm sure we'll hear some great stories as to why you didn't hear about the program. But outreach, and bring your program to the people so that you can, again, maximize the number of applications you got. And that was one of our big goals for our program.
Fantastic. And Hacker, I want to come to you on this as well. Perhaps you don't have the urban-rural split that our question alluded to, but do you have any kind of pushback about access, about a divide between people who can access the app versus those who cannot?
Actually, there is a research, and the research was conducted a few years ago, if I'm not wrong, 4 or 5 years ago, and it said 92% of the population of Istanbul has access to smartphones. Probably currently it is even higher than that. So that's why it is not a very major challenge to have access to a smartphone. And since we are in a metropolitan city, so we do not have too much rural. So of course there are imbalances between the equity and between the level of wealth, between poor and rich, but still I don't think that there is a major issue with the ability to have access to the services offered by the municipality. By the way, the municipality offers all of its services already. This is just a channel to consolidate everything, to have a better access and just one-click transaction, or so otherwise the municipality continues with all the with all the functions anyway. So that's what I could say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much for making that clear. And I'll just come to you on this point as well before we finish up, because we are right up against time. These kind of access questions are, again, things that governments really need to be aware of when they're driving these digital transformation programs. Any kind of tips or expertise that you can share with governments and with the public servants watching along, and how they can kind of tackle them?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard, right? And very quickly, I mean, I think there's two sides to it. There's the access challenge. And I think, having some physical touch points and all of that can really help alleviate that. And then there's the usage challenge in terms of, once you've digitized payments, where do people actually, what do they do? I mean, okay, now I've got a card, but I can't eat my card, or I got a check, but I can't eat my check. I need to go and transact in the real world. And I think, one of the things that's where really a public sector program can really galvanize an ecosystem, because especially if a lot of payments are going into rural areas, that's a lot of people who suddenly have a digital instrument in their hand who want to transact. It's a great call out to merchants and entrepreneurs in the area to start to accept digital payments. And that's where I think we see a lot of partnership from a public-private partnership standpoint with us, because the alternative is just, hauling cash into a rural area. And so I think using, the program as a catalyst for change can actually be a really strong way to kind of approach that challenge as you go forwards.
Great, thanks. And I can see Alex has got a very literal catalyst for change right there with him, which is always nice to get photobombed at the last minute by a cat. That is where I'm going to have to bring today's session to a close. Thank you very much to our panel for joining us today, and for everybody watching along, and for everybody submitting questions. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but I think that was a really excellent discussion. Many thanks to MasterCard for joining us as the knowledge partner on today's webinar. You will be receiving a recording of this session when it's available in the next few days. I saw somebody asked that in the questions. Yes, a recording will be made available, and there will be a report of the session on the Global Government Forum website in the next few weeks too. Before that, though, there's a survey that will be popping into your inbox round about now to get your thoughts on today's session. It would really help me and the team here at Global Government Forum to make sure that we provide the best content for you all. If you are able to fill that in, and any ideas on future topics you would like covered in webinars, please do share them as well. That makes my job a lot easier. And in terms of future webinars, we're going to highlight our next one, which is FinTech in the future. Where is the greatest potential for central government's use of FinTech solutions, which I'm sure is of interest to a lot of the people who are watching along today as well. That's on the 17th of November. Please do register for that, and you can find the full link, the full list, apologies, of Global Government Forum's webinars on our website, globalgovernmentforum.com. So once again, thanks to everybody for coming along today, and we hope to see you at another one of our webinars very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.